Teaching Against Prejudice, Human Rights, and EFL. Kip Cates, Tottori University, Japan. So, welcome to this workshop. My name is Kip Cates. I'm a retired professor at Tottori University and also past chair of the Global Issues GILE SIG. The topics we'll cover in this workshop are as follows. We'll start with some background, a look at human rights education. We'll do some activities, human rights squares, looks at types of human rights. We'll look at the Human Rights Universal Declaration, ranking of different countries by human rights, teaching about prejudice, role plays, human rights heroes, and finally some resources. This will be a very rich, full 1 hour of workshop activities. I hope you enjoy it. Let's begin. I'd like to start with some background. So the activities we'll look at today are from a global studies course that I teach in Tottori University. In Tottori University, we have 2 courses, Global Studies 1 and Global Studies 2. Global Studies 1 consists of 2 parts. The first half deals with world themes. Every week, a new topic. We study about world religions, world languages, world flags, world names, world writing systems, world taboos, and so on. And the second half of the course is about world regions, peoples, countries, and cultures focused on Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. That's in Global Studies 1, a 1-semester course. Global Studies 2 is also a 1-semester course, but it focuses on world issues. So Global Studies 2 is a global issues course, broken down into 4 main areas. Topics linked to war and peace, topics linked to human rights, topics linked to development, and topics linked to the environment. For each of these major areas, we spend 3 weeks at Tottori University. 3 weeks on war and peace, 3 weeks on human rights, 3 weeks on development issues, hunger, poverty, and 3 weeks on environmental issues. So today, the activities and ideas that I'll be introducing come from our Human Rights 3 weeks at Tottori University, Global Studies 2 course. 1, 2, 3 solid weeks. We do a lot of activities. I'll be introducing some of these here for English language teachers. So, to start with, we should look at human rights education. What is it? What does it aim for? What kind of approaches does it take? Let's go. We'll start with our introduction. We live in a world where large numbers of people are denied their basic human rights. A glance at any day's newspaper headlines will reveal incidents of genocide and apartheid, political repression and torture, discrimination and persecution of minorities, denial of individual freedoms, and even of entire people's rights to a homeland. International surveys show that these problems occur worldwide under regimes of all political persuasions. So human rights issues are a major theme of our world today, a major problem for us to tackle, even in the language classroom. So how can we teach about these? Let's look at objectives. The major goals of the field of human rights education are outlined by the 1985 Council of Europe Recommendation on Human Rights Education. So this document says, first, the study of human rights in schools should lead to an understanding of and sympathy for the concepts of justice, equality, freedom, peace, dignity, individual rights, and democracy. That's a major set of issues to deal with. Second, the emphasis in teaching and learning about human rights should be positive. This is a key point. Too often people show negative problems or the challenges around the world and make it very dark, kind of a kurai, a negative experience. It should be positive, keeping a positive tone. Third, throughout their school career, all young people should learn about human rights as part of their preparation for life in a pluralistic democracy. This is a Council of Europe recommendation, but for us around the world, even here in Japan, preparing our students for responsible citizenship on the local, national, and global levels, that's part of why human rights education is important. Fourth point, concepts associated with human rights can and should be acquired from an early age. Children can deal with issues of fairness and rights, as well as adults and older people. And last, schools are communities which can and should be an example of the respect for the dignity of the individual and for difference, for tolerance, and for equality of opportunity. In other words, schools and our language classrooms should model what it means to respect the rights of our learners, of differences, of diversity. Let's look at the right-hand side, teaching aims. Human rights educators seek to do the following three things. 1, to show students how we are part of a historical movement dedicated to achieving human rights for all. Slavery was abolished, the right to vote achieved, women's rights improved. There's a long historical tradition that we can be part of with our students, pushing forward to a future where rights are guaranteed across the board. And 2, human rights educators seek to inspire learners with positive human rights role models. Individuals such as Martin Luther King and groups such as Amnesty International. In our language teaching on content dealing with human rights, we should try to inspire our learners. And number 3, we should show learners how to put into action their commitment to human rights for all people. So 3 different aims. Finally, teaching approach. Human rights educators also stress the importance of teaching about, teaching for, and teaching in human rights. These prepositions, about, for, and in. Teaching about human rights involves giving students knowledge about human rights issues, knowledge and facts, that's important. Teaching for human rights means helping students develop the skills necessary to work for human rights. You can know a lot and do nothing. We want to empower students to be able to go out and take action for a world where rights are respected. And third, teaching in human rights means creating a classroom atmosphere where the rights of all students are respected. We learn in a rights-respectful classroom about human rights as we empower students to work for human rights. That's a brief overview of human rights education then. It's a challenging field, a very interesting one for us as language teachers to think about and perhaps deal with in our classrooms. Let's start with some activities then. I'd like to introduce the way I approach my work with human rights in English with students at Tottori University. Introductions are important. Here are 2 activities I start with. One is a human rights video on YouTube, short and sweet, in both English and Japanese versions. The video is called The Story of Human Rights. There's a Japanese version as well, Jinken no Monogatari. And these English-Japanese, 11 minutes, short and sweet. The video itself starts off as follows. What are human rights, it asks. And then, very basic. Human rights means human, a member of the Homo sapiens species, a man, woman, or child, or person. And rights means things to which you are entitled or allowed, freedoms that are guaranteed. Very basic definition. What are human rights? Human and rights. The video then goes out onto the street to interview people. What are human rights? Give me some examples. And it's very interesting for about 3 or 4 minutes to watch these people in the street in Japan, the US, Brazil, Asia, Europe, all of them. Human rights? Gosh, I don't know. I've never thought about it. People on the street Most of us, in general, never think much about human rights, and probably it's hard to actually name some. So, from there, the video often says, well, let's take a look, and there's a long 10-minute history from ancient times, the Code of Hammurabi, up through Roman law and the French Revolution, American Revolution, United Nations, up to today. Again, very interesting. I recommend taking a look when you have time. So this idea of what are human rights, going out into the street and asking people, I put my students in group and say, let's discuss. Did you study human rights at school? What did you study? What did you learn? And for students to get in small groups and in English discuss, it's always a chance to share their experiences. If you're ambitious, you could give them a task. Go out and interview 5 people for homework. Your parents, grandparents, people in the street, and so on. What are human rights? What do they know? And compare. Let's take a look at a second human rights activity. This is called Human Rights Squares, and this is an introduction from a book called Teaching About Human Rights by David Scheiman. Scheiman is an American high school teacher, and he deals at high school level with human rights. This is his opening activity, which I've kind of adopted for English language teaching. So the idea of human rights squares, you have these different squares, and you have to fill in an example for each square. Here's my adaptation of David Scheiman's. So I pass out to students this handout. It has 20 boxes, 20 squares, and in each square there is one topic. I say, students, get in groups, and you have 5-10 minutes to write in at least one example for every single square. Are you ready? Groups of 4, groups of 5, go to it. And for the next 5 or 10 minutes, lots of activity as students go through in random order perhaps. Number 6, number 4, one example of this, one example of that. As students are buzzing, trying to fill in one example for each square, I am up on the blackboard, drawing empty squares, ready to fill in their answers. Now, if you look at this, you can see the way Scheiman has designed it, and I've adapted slightly. We have things such as number 14, a singer who sings about human rights. We have things like number 17, a book about human rights. Take a look maybe at number 18, a person who is a champion of human rights. Or, for example, number 16, a human right sometimes denied to women. He's designed this to have some human rights issues and countries, also pop singers, even things like movies. Number 7, a movie about human rights. Once students have finished 5-10 minutes filling in as many squares as possible, I say, okay, blackboard time, give me your examples. And I make it pretty much random. Students can choose any square, number 4, number 8, number 12, your choice. So we start maybe with Keiko. Keiko, what square do you choose? You chose number 4, a group that wants to deny rights to others. What's your example? What did your group find? And maybe she says the Taliban. Then you make Keiko explain, who are the Taliban? Where are they? And why are they denying rights to others? So Keiko has to struggle. The Taliban, it's a group in Afghanistan. They are denying women the right to education. There's a famous case of Malala. Good. She's explaining something important in English. Next, we'll go to maybe Hiroyuki. He chooses number 7, a movie about human rights. Give me the example from your group. Our group wrote Selma. Okay, tell me about the movie. Again, students explaining in English. Selma, it's a movie about the march over the Selma Bridge, civil rights movement in the U.S., Black, Martin Luther King. Again, a chance to express in English. Next one, Takeshi. You chose number 2, a country where human rights are violated. What's your example? China. Please explain. And again, he might go off and say, well, there's Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, or maybe Tibet and so on, and expressing the kind of rights violation in that country. Student by student. Next, the next student chooses number 5, an organization which fights for human rights. What's your example? Our group thought of Amnesty International. What is it? Please explain. Next student, choose a square, any square. Number 3, a group which was persecuted in the past. What example does your group have? Jewish people. Please explain, come on. So here's kind of interesting. You get into things like passive grammar, okay, the passive tense. Where were the Jewish people persecuted? Okay, maybe in Germany, for example. Who persecuted them? Who were they persecuted by? By the Nazis, okay? Why were they persecuted? Because the Nazis hated Jewish people, etc., etc. Next student. Number 1, give me an example. Here you get a bit about phrasing. They might say something like the right to education, okay? Or maybe genron no jiu. Hard to translate in English, freedom of speech. Somebody might choose number 8, a country where people are tortured, and answer North Korea, they might say. Please explain, and off they go. Or last student, number 6, a country where people are denied rights because of their race. Your group, what example did you come up with? We thought the USA. Please explain, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and so on. So this is an interesting activity. It's pretty open. Students buzz together in a group. They brainstorm what they know. Then they give to the teacher who writes on the blackboard, and they explain as they go. It's designed about movies and pop songs and organizations, enough that students can get by and get things. After students have given me their ideas, I say, well, let me give you my ideas. And I hand out a separate handout saying, here are some ideas from me. Number 3, groups that were persecuted. We have Jewish people, Christians persecuted by the Romans, Burakumin persecuted by people in Japan. Number 4, examples of groups that want to deny rights to others. KKK, neo-Nazis. Again, a set of things from me. We won't read all of these, but you can see, give students a chance to show what they know and then take them farther with handouts that expand their knowledge. That's what we're aiming at here. So here, my examples may be about different movies. I might mention Schindler's List, Mississippi Burning, Dances with Wolves. Countries that use torture, wow, 120 countries around the world, according to Amnesty International. Number 10, name one human rights issue in Japan. I might throw out karoshi, the right to rest, the fact that people still are dying from overwork. Again, many examples from me to have students get involved with each of these issues, their examples and my examples. Okay. I recommend this activity. It works well with my students. If you have lower level students, instead of 20 squares, drop it down to 10 squares, but it does get students actively involved, talking, discussing, explaining in English, and raising awareness. So awareness, next, we want students to understand different types of human rights. And I break this down into 6 basic types. Let's take a look. The first type of human right is civil and political rights. Okay? The right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, self-determination. These are standard classic political rights, civil rights, okay? This is one aspect, one of the 6 types of rights. Number 2 is social and economic rights. The right to food, shelter, healthcare, employment. And again, this is a different category. Often, when people talk about human rights, they stay with politics and civil rights. But these are also basic. People do have a right to work, a right to healthcare. These are all big issues around the world. Third is minority rights. The rights of ethnic minorities, racial minorities, social minorities, indigenous peoples. For students to understand about human rights, they have to understand that there are minorities of different types. Foreign workers, LGBT, indigenous people, different races, each who have rights and rights issues. Number 4 is the category of women's rights. The right for women to vote, equal pay for equal right, a career, participate in politics. Again, this is a major issue ongoing around the world, women struggling for equality. And this area of human rights we'll talk about a bit later. Next is children's rights. children's rights to special care, to go to school, to protection from abuse. Children are vulnerable. They have rights and they need to be protected. This is another area of rights. And last would be other rights. Rights such as animal rights and environmental rights, the right to clean air and clean water. This is a new category of rights, but also, in a sense, these are basic. The right to breathe clean air, the right to drink clean water, the right to enjoy a healthy environment. Animal rights, again, a big issue. So with this handout, I get students thinking a little bit about these different kind of rights, different varieties, and we can jump into some of these. From Types of Human Rights, we say, I wonder if there's a list somewhere. Has anybody sat down and made a list of human rights? Surprise, surprise, the United Nations has a major list called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Background. In World War II, with the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, massive violations of human rights worldwide, when that war ended and the United Nations was established, they decided we need a declaration. We need a list of rights that must be respected by all members of the UN. The committee to design this list was Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of the American president, and it was finished in 1948. This is a major declaration. It's something that everyone should know. As a member of the UN, Japan has committed itself to promoting and publicizing these rights, and yet most of my students have never heard of it and know nothing about it. So that's part of my aim, is to jump in English with this particular document. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights consists of 30 different articles, 30 basic human rights. Let's take a look. The first 15, we have equality. Everyone is born free. We have a right to equality of treatment. 2, freedom from discrimination. 3, the right to life, liberty, security. 4, freedom from slavery. 5, freedom from torture. 6, recognition as a person before the law. 7, equality before the law. 8, remedy by tribunal to appeal a case. 9, freedom from arbitrary arrest. 10, the right to a fair public hearing. 11, to be innocent until proven guilty. The right to privacy, 12, to freedom of movement, 13, to asylum when escaping persecution as a political refugee, 14, the right to have a nationality, 15, 16, the right to marriage and a family, 17, the right to property, 18, freedom of belief, 19, freedom of opinion, 20, freedom of assembly, 21, the right to take part in your government, 22, the right to Social Security and work, 23, the right to leisure, 24, adequate living standard, 25, education, 26, the right to participate in the cultural life of the community, 27, the right to a social order that depends on human rights, the right to have a mutual responsibility in ensuring these, and 30, freedom from state or personal interference. Wow, that's a whole long list of rights, 30 different ones. So I've used videos and clips and simplified English to teach these to students. You can, if you have 30 students in your class, give students one right each to go off, look at it, come back and give a short report. A number of places have actually tried to bring these together into different thematic areas. So this is one example you can find online a bit about the list of civil political rights, which articles apply, economic, social, and so on. There's a lot you can do with this, and for me, it's enough to have students read a little bit about it in English, basically, to understand, maybe do a bit of research, perhaps see a video clip or two about these, to say, wow, there actually is an official list, and Japan has committed itself as a UN member to guaranteeing these. For me, from there, I go on and say, well, let's take this idea of lists and do a bit of a ranking exercise, okay? Human rights check. Let's use a checklist to rank the human rights scores of countries around the world. Wow, this is a big undertaking, ranking the human rights of different countries. So first, we need some vocabulary, right? I have a list I have prepared in advance, slightly expanded from the 30 items in the Universal Declaration. It's a list of 40 human rights. This list was drawn up by an expert we'll meet later. And first I say, well, if we want to use this list to check different countries, we have to understand the list. Let's take a look and learn some English vocabulary. So I give them a bilingual handout. Page 1, here we have 1 to 18. Let's look at the English. The first section, is there freedom to travel in your own country? Number 1. Travel outside your own country? Number 2. Hold peaceful meetings, teach ideas, monitor rights, and so on. The second block, from number 7 onward, is freedom from. Number 7, is there freedom from slavery? 8, freedom from state killings. Freedom from torture, 9. Freedom from compulsory work. Again, a set of things freedom from. Next page. 19, this section, freedom for or rights to. Example 19, peaceful political opposition. For example, maybe 23, social and economic equality for women. Maybe 24, independent newspapers, independent publishing, and so on. The next block in the middle is legal rights. 29, from deprivation of nationality. Number 32, from secret trials, for example. And the last block are personal rights at the bottom. The right to marriage, 36, or equality of the sexes during divorce, and so on. So very carefully, I have students studying these. I say, hey, here's a list, Japanese and English. Study, study. You have 3 minutes to memorize the English. Go back and forth and get ready. Then it's practice time. Before we get into our ranking, to practice this vocabulary, I put students in pairs, have them get their lists out and say, let's ask questions. How do you say shike in English? Number 11. Shike is capital punishment. Very good. How do you say himitsu saiban? Number 32. Answer, secret trial. Good. How do you say seijiteki kenetsu? Number 17. That's political censorship. How do you say rodo komiai in English? That is trade unions. So here we do some pretty intensive practice in pairs, question, 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 students going back and forth. These are all solid vocabulary items, part of a vocabulary lexicon linked to the law, to rights, to crime, to politics, and so on. This is good vocabulary building for understanding newspapers and current events. We're ready for our human rights check. We've looked at 40 different rights in a list. We've checked the English. So I turn to students and say, this is Japan, so why don't we do a human rights check of Japan? I mean, you're Japanese. This is Japan here. Let's do it, our country, okay? So we decide we'll do a human rights check of Japan using those 40 rights in the list we practiced. Question, do these 40 rights exist in Japan? By yourself, read each human right and then mark a circle if this right is guaranteed in Japan, a triangle if it's partly guaranteed, an X if it's not guaranteed, and a question mark if you're not sure. So, students, take a look here and individually, by themselves, they get about 5 minutes to go very carefully, mark yes, no, partially, or I don't know. Okay, these 40 different rights. Once they've done this, I say, okay, you put circles and X's and so on. Now, add your marks to the total score. For example, if you say, is there freedom in Japan to travel freely? And you have yes. Number 2, can you travel freely overseas? Also yes. Practice homosexuality? Maybe no, and so on. Add up how many circles and how many X's and give Japan a total score. What's your total score for all the 40 human rights? Your ranking of Japan according to this list of 40 human rights. Once students have finished ranking Japan and totaled their score, if it's all circles, it's 100%. If it's 50 half circles and half X's, that would be 50%. Then I put them in small groups. Compare with your partner. Is your ranking the same or different? This is always a big surprise. Students, In my classes, almost all Japanese, maybe 95%, and yet they're wildly differing answers about how they rank Japan. Ask student 1, Junko, what score did you give Japan based on your ranking? 96%, almost perfect. Okay, let's go over maybe to Koji. What did you do? I ranked Japan 62%. Whoa, totally different. Okay, what about, let's ask Sachiko. 74%. Whoa, interesting. Okay, somebody else. What about Kazuyuki? 88%. Okay, let's ask somebody else. Wow, somebody scored Japan 30%. These are all Japanese young people giving very, very different scores to Japan based on the same set of 40 human rights. How can that be? We're always interested, always surprised. I'm writing these on the blackboard as we go. Students saying, whoa, she gave 96, I gave 30, he gave 62. And I ask, well, let's try to chase this down. We have very, very different scores, 96, 30, and so on. Why is this happening? There is a reason. Some people view Japan with an easy eye. Other people view Japan with a very critical eye. Let's take a look. If you have an easy eye and you're ranking Japan, let's take the first 6 items here, okay? So, number 1, is there freedom to travel in your own country? Of course, right? I can jump on a bus, go to Hiroshima, jump on a Shinkansen, go to Tokyo. It's totally free. Yes, that's okay. Number 2, is there freedom to travel outside your own country? Of course, right? I just jump on a plane, buy a ticket. I can fly to LA. I can be in Disneyland, USA tomorrow. No problem. Is there freedom to hold peaceful meetings? Of course there is. Freedom to teach ideas? No problem in Japan. Freedom to monitor human rights violations? Yes, yes, yes. Freedom to publish and educate in ethnic languages? Ethnic languages, what's that? Ainu maybe? Well, of course. So for some students, no problem at all. Yes, 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 yes. 96% for Japan. What about those who are more critical? And every class you get some very interesting. I've had students give Japan a ranking of 40%, 30%, and lower. Why? Let's take a look. Critical eye, is there freedom to travel in your own country? The student says no. Please explain. In Japan, there are American military bases. They are on Japanese soil. I am not allowed to go inside those military bases. Therefore, I'm not allowed to travel freely in my country. Whoa, he's right. Number 2, is there freedom to travel outside your own country? No. What do you mean? Well, to travel outside Japan, I need a passport, and that passport is given by the Japanese government. Sometimes the government does not give passports. There's an example of a Japanese journalist who wanted to fly to Iraq. The Japanese government did not issue him a passport and wouldn't allow him to go. Again, not total freedom. Is there freedom to hold peaceful meetings? Maybe, but sometimes depends. If it's a communist party or something, if there's maybe certain groups that the Japanese government doesn't like, you may find yourself arrested. Teach ideas and receive information? No, not free. Please explain you as a student. And they will say, well, in high school we have textbooks, but those textbooks are authorized by the Japanese Ministry of Education. They're censored. Those textbooks have to be vetted by the government before we can use them. That's not free. Interesting. Is there freedom to monitor human rights violations? In some cases difficult. Every week, every month in the newspaper, you find examples of Japanese refugees who suddenly died in prison and no one was monitoring their situation. Is there freedom to publish and educate in ethnic languages? Ainu? I don't know, okay? So you see, it's quite different. Helping students to understand, you can have a very easy eye, everything's wonderful, or a very critical eye. Both these views are important for mutual understanding. Some people have easy eyes, some people have critical eyes. What about the experts? At this point in the class, I'll bring in the expert, this guy, Charles Humana. In 1991, Charles Humana, after 5 years of research, published a book called The World Human Rights Guide, a checklist of the human rights situation in 104 countries around the world. Humana used the same 40 human rights that the students did for their checklist of Japan. So here's an expert, Charles Humana. He's using the same 40 human rights in our checklist. What rank did he give for Japan? If you look in his book, turn to the Japan page, the answer is 82% for Japan's human rights score. I photocopy the page, hand it out to students, and we study it together. Here it is. Top left, Japan human rights score 82%. Where did Japan lose points? On the left, if you go down maybe to number 11, capital punishment, well, Japan does have capital punishment. You lose points there. If you look on the middle column, number 22, social and economic equality for women, no, Japan lost points there. Here and there, points linked to equality, to some legal items and so on. 82%, Japan's ranking. So if Japan is 82, what about other countries? What's their ranking? Well, in his book, Humana has a listing of other countries. I photocopied the list and handed it out. Here it is. He has the country on the left and the ranking on the right, okay? So, I say, let's take a look. Let's study this list. What's the human rights rating for Saudi Arabia? So it's ABC. Students have to go ABC, Saudi. That'll be in the middle column at the bottom. Saudi Arabia, the human rights ranking is 29%. That's low. What's the human rights rating for Thailand? Thailand, third column in the right top. Thailand, 62%. Aha. What about for the USA? United States, also at the top right. United States, human rights ranking, 90%. That's pretty high. India. Let's see, India, middle column at the top. India is 54%. Put students in pairs, have them give each other a question. What's the human rights rating for this country and that country? 3 or 4 minutes, a lot of buzzing as they practice English and look at these rankings. This paper, we do a short series of questions, okay, with these country assessments. I ask students, find the highest score. And they look, the highest score is 99%. Which country got 99%? Finland, wow. Finland, on a checklist of 40 human rights, is almost perfect, 99%. That's pretty amazing. That's the best score in the world for human rights. What's the lowest score on this list? It was 17%. Whoa! Which countries had 17%? 2 of them, Burma and Iraq. 70% is terrible. That means almost all the rights are denied in those countries. What are the top 5 countries on that list? Well, Finland's 99. You have 4 countries 98. Denmark, Germany, Holland, New Zealand were all 98%. Remember Japan, 85? Sounded pretty good? Woo, doesn't compare to 98 or 99. Bottom 5, worst countries. Burma, Iraq, Sudan, China, North Korea. 17, 18, 20, 21%. What was the world average? If you take all the world's rankings and average that, it was 62%. That's barely a pass in my university. When was this data compiled? The date is 1991. That's old. That's 30 years old. It's way out of date. It captures a period of time in the past. And how many countries got 100%? None. Every single country had human rights issues still to be dealt with. No country perfect. So this is kind of a case study. An old list, 1991, looking at scores. What about today? That's a homework task. Research and find out those 40 ranks today. From lists and declarations, let's move on to some case studies. I like to deal with a couple. One is about women's rights. Women's rights is a big issue. We spent a whole lesson on this. I use this handout. We'll take a look maybe at part 1 and part 5. It's a whole 90-minute lesson. We'll just taste it briefly. I like quizzes. Quizzes put students in groups, have them interact with each other as they process the English and find the answer. Question 1. When is International Women's Day? March 8th. What country was ranked number 1 for gender equality? Iceland. Question 3. What was Japan's rank for gender equality? Number 114, way down. Question 4. On average, the salary for working women in Japan is? What percent of the salary for men? Sadly, it's only 73%. Sports. What percent of athletes in the first modern Olympic Games in 1896 were women? Answer 0. What about for the 2016 Olympics in Rio? Actually, 45%, almost half. Here, questions and answers, students thinking about women's issues. The right to vote. This year is the 100th anniversary of American women's right to vote. Let's take a look at this. 1893, the first country in the world was New Zealand. 1906 was Finland. 1920, United States. 1938, the Philippines. Japan, 1945, and, surprise, Switzerland was 1971. Amazing. I'll give students this kind of handout, a list of the dates of women's right to vote. You can see on the left, the first countries, New Zealand, 1893, Australia, 1902, Finland, and so on. And again, this is a good chance to have students get in pairs and quiz each other. When did women gain the right to vote in Germany? Check, 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 check. 1928. Pair questions back and forth. What about China? What about Singapore? What about South Africa? What about Brazil? Minority rights is another good topic to look at. Here, again, we're looking at different kinds of minorities. Indigenous peoples. Maori in New Zealand, about 16% of the population. Ainu in Japan, about 0.1%. The Maya in Guatemala make up 40% of the country's population. And in Canada, Native Canadian, the First Nations, are about 4.4%. So you can give little fact cards to students about the Ainu and so on, Indigenous peoples, hand out cards to students where they study, go off and do homework, research, and so on. Lots of examples of different groups. I like to pick up Native Americans, North American Indians. And what we do is a special style. We start with images. What's your image of North American Indians? Is it violent, dangerous, scary, bad? In my case, I was raised in that style. So image, we have to get information. Let's study. Out come the handouts, the readings, the research. Actually, North American Indians make up about 1.3% of the U.S. population. 500 different nations. Students could jump in and learn about the Cherokee, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Sioux, and so on. And from information, it's actually nice to actually have experience. I like to pop students off to watch a video clip about Native American teens. Young teenagers in the States talk about their Native American origins. Breaking stereotypes, finding the real situation through YouTube clips. And if you like music, I recommend this famous song, Lament of the Cherokee Nation, Paul Revere and the Raiders' classic song about the dispossession of the Native Americans. Japan. It's also good to get students thinking about minorities in our countries. Put students in group and brainstorm. Zainichi Koreans, yes, that's one. Foreign workers is another minority. Nikkei Brazilians, true. Ainu, yes. Zainichi Chinese, Okinawans even. What I do when working with minorities is to give students a homework assignment, research. Profile 2 minorities, one in Japan and one outside Japan. Features, the history, the current situation, and so on. Free choice. Students always have a good chance to learn about these. Okay, prejudice. One of my activities is called 10 Types of Prejudice. And first we have to distinguish prejudice is an attitude. He's prejudiced, she's prejudiced against people. Discrimination is an action. People discriminate against others through their acts. And for students, I want to give them this task, brainstorming. Get in groups of 4, think of 10 different kinds of prejudice. Give them a couple of minutes and see what they come up with. Then I often have cards students turn over one by one to reveal my 10 answers. These include lookism, ageism, abilityism, sexism, homophobia, racism, regional bias, national bias, religious bias, and social bias. So students are turning over cards, each one of these, maybe discussing them, giving examples. You get a second handout. Let's look more closely. Lookism is based on appearance. Is someone tall or short, fat or thin, so-called ugly or beautiful, and we discriminate because of that. Ageism is young or old. Abilityism, based on disabilities, people who are blind, deaf, in a wheelchair. Sexism is gender-based. Homophobia around sexual orientation. Racism on race. Regional bias is discrimination against certain regions. National bias, nationality, religious bigotry about religions, and social bias is basically social class. We talk about these a bit, and then it's task time. Read the following sentences and write the kind of prejudice. Number 1, I don't think he'll be a good teacher. He's got long hair. Whoa, that is lookism, appearance-only discrimination. Number 2, she's from Totori, so she's probably not very smart. Ouch, that's regional bias. Trust me, we get this in Totori. Number 3, be careful, you can't trust him. He's Jewish. Religious bigotry. I don't want my daughter to marry him. He's a truck driver. Oh, that's social bias, social class. We can't let him join our sports club. He's gay. Homophobia. Stop that Egyptian. He might be a terrorist. National bias. Don't choose her for the computer job. She's in a wheelchair. Abilityism. Number 8, we need an extra worker. John's no good. He's 65 years old. Standard ageism. 9, this hot spring is only for our people, not her. She's black. Racism. And last, we need a man as prime minister. Women aren't suitable. Sexism. You can have students pick up one of these and go off and do research for homework to find cases in Japanese society and abroad that show this. It's very rich talking about these with students and researching. Our time is running short. Prejudice role plays. There are a number of ones I'll introduce briefly. One I like to use was an apartheid role play in the book Strangers in Their Own Country, William Bigelow's curriculum on South Africa. I taught this for about 20 years. Students come to class, put them in 2 groups. Group number 1 is the whites, only 16% of the class. Group number 2 is blacks, 85%. The 3 students who are white get the whole classroom. The other 27 students who are black have to go and hide in a corner because that's the land that was allotted to each. If you're interested, get in touch. This is a very powerful role play where students feel discrimination, become black or white, and discuss it afterwards. A second famous role play about discrimination is the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes video by Jane Elliott in 1970. This was a classic example of an American woman who set up an elementary school class where blue-eyed kids were better the first day and brown-eyed kids were worse. She set up a discrimination situation, and the second day she reversed it. It's a powerful video. We watch it in my class with students, okay? It's a video which is very direct. You see a teacher and kids reacting. Hey, we're discriminating against him because he has blue eyes? That makes no sense. Trying to link it to the way discrimination works in the real world. Finally, getting down to the end, human rights heroes, inspiring students. Definitely try to find human rights heroes for students to profile, research, discuss, to practice their speaking, listening, reading, writing, research, and presentation skills with Malala and Frank Mandela and so on. I like to pick up 1 or 2 cases and in detail look through these. One I might work with is Jackie Robinson, breaking the color barrier, the first black player in the American Major League Baseball. Or somebody like Peter Benenson, the British lawyer who founded Amnesty International, who got angry that people were being arrested only because of their opinions. And human rights organizations. If you go to Wikipedia, there's a long list of human rights organizations. From there, I choose maybe about 4, okay? For my students, I'll say, okay, we're going to break into groups, 4 people, each person gets a different organization to study. Here they are: Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Anti-Slavery International, and Freedom House. Each of these is very special. Human Rights Watch, classic, very strong organization. Their website talks about the work they do worldwide fighting for human rights. Anti-slavery is maybe the oldest NGO, founded 1839, incredible, still working hard for a world free from slavery. Freedom House is a very interesting organization. They have a special map of freedom in the world, which countries are free, which are less free, which are not free, and rankings country by country to show this. And finally, Amnesty International. Amnesty International is maybe the most famous organization, founded in 1961, Nobel Peace Prize 1977, its famous logo, a candle of hope inside barbed wire. So again, this is a chance to do some jigsaw sharing. Student 1, here's your paper, Human Rights Watch, study, get ready to explain. Student 2, Anti-Slavery. 3, Freedom House. 4, Amnesty International. Sharing, jigsaw, puzzle style, good learning, and students become experts on their organization. Resources. There are a lot of resources out there. Let me introduce a few. If you like books, there are hundreds out there. The ones that I recommend: again, David Scheinman, teaching about human rights. Gordon Allport, great background, The Nature of Prejudice. Books, Amnesty International, contemporary human rights activists. Books in Japanese, if you like, Sankagata Jinken Kyoku, Sekai no Jinken. There's a lot of books out there. The list is here. You can take a look. Again, pause the video if you like and browse through those. Books on human rights issues, human rights education, and resources. Again, about organizations, video clips, articles in different newsletters, and Japanese books. For specific topics, for example, women, My Global Issues SIG, we've often issued special resource pages, books and movies on women's issues. Similar for Indigenous peoples, movies, books, and so on, teaching about minority groups. So to finish then, those of us in JALT'S Global Issues in Language Education Special Interest Group, the GILE SIG, are working to bring ideas, topics, content, issues from the field of global education, peace, human rights, and the environment into language teaching materials, research, our ideas, curricula, and so on. If you're interested to learn more, definitely get in touch with me and do think about signing up to our Global Issues SIG newsletter. Every issue, 4 times a year, we have activities, resources, articles about human rights education, very much worth your time. Okay, we've come to the end of our workshop. I've thrown a lot of information at you, talking quickly. I hope you've been able to follow. Teaching against prejudice is a big challenge, but language teachers around the world have a chance to help promote awareness of human rights, to help inspire students to work against prejudice and discrimination, to fight for a world of justice and equality. I believe strongly that should be part of our mission as language teachers, and I hope from this workshop you've seen a few ideas, examples, activities to try out perhaps in your own classes. If you'd like to get in touch, there's my email address. And again, after this presentation, we should have 5 minutes for Q&A on Zoom. Thank you very much for learning about human rights and prejudice with me. Good luck with the rest of the conference, and do consider dealing with this topic in your own classes. Thank you.